Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311.
Will you go ahead and talk again, please?
Okay, testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4. WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4.
This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. WebEx tests. Check 1, 2. Hear me? Hear me?
I see you on the WebEx and we can hear you, but it's not on the screen yet. It hasn't auto camera. So it switched to me. Now see if it can switch to you.
Check 1, 2. I heard you on that one. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4. WebEx test. 1, 2. Check, check. Mm.
Still no camera switch. Give me one moment.
I'm not sure that everything is,
You check the chairman spot too, FYI.
everything is like up.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.
Last issue, in the middle issue, we have a woman talking about doing villages of tiny homes. She's like our entertainment. Love to very.
All right, Glenn, go and try again.
Okay. Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh my gosh, we did. It was
Testing
just-
1,
it
2,
was
3,
horrific,
4.
like,
WebEx
past the
test.
night
Check
time,
1, 2, 3, 4.
Different
Check.
areas all around Richmond.
It still didn't switch. I'm gonna go reset the IDK box.
Okay.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311.
Areas too, but it's not only ocean.
All right, Glenn, can you try that again, please?
Rivers, like, you know, anything that's tidal.
You know, the little Tyson's Corner and it's.
Right, yes.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check.
This was so surprising to me when we did it. It was always.
Nope. All right, I'm gonna check something. 1 second.
All
Always
right.
actually.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia.
Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, Glenn, go ahead and try now, please.
Okay, WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4. WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. Check 1, 2, 3. WebEx, I see me on the screens.
But I had to manually route WebEx in order for you to be able to see. That means we have to go back to broadcast input.
Sorry, you want me to say something again?
Go ahead and try again.
WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4. WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4. Check, check. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. WebEx test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Check, check.
Nope, still no auto switching. All right.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. Did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. This is the Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C-311. did you know live Senate video is now available at youtube.com/@Senate of Virginia. Senate Committee Room, C311.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Y'all not awake yet? I'm awake and I'm suffering from jet lag, so good morning. Okay, all right. Welcome and thank you all so much for being here this morning. And I would like to go ahead and call our meeting to order this morning of the Virginia Housing Commission. And we are joined online by Delegate Adele McClure. Good morning, Delegate McClure.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Okay. And hopefully we will also be joined by Delegate Marshall. And once he's there, we will welcome him as well. We will have some opening remarks from Elizabeth Powell, who is the Executive Director for the Virginia Housing Commission.
Good morning, all. Great meeting on tap. Today, as we gather as a full commission, we'll hear statistics from our perennial favorites, Hamilton Lombard, the demographer from Weldon Cooper, and Ryan Price, the economist for the realtors. Then we'll hear about an innovative housing solution, and then the overview of the implications of Freddie and Fannie returning to privatization. Each of the speakers will cite sources, but bring their own perspectives to the presentation. It is not endorsed work of the commission. The information is provided so members are knowledgeable and can form opinions on needed legislation in the housing arena. I'll start y'all off with just a couple of facts. Currently, one avenue to home ownership is condominiums. Condos nationwide are now thought of as a riskier investment. There's been a large dip in condo prices, a 12% dip this past May, the second biggest price drop since 2012. There are 80% more condo sellers than buyers. In comparison, single-family home prices rose 0.05% in May year over year. The median home price in the U.S. was $462,206 this past May. How does Virginia compare to the nation? According to the Virginia Realtors May report, housing inventory remains low, and the rise in home prices is beginning to level off. Since 2020, data from HUD's annual point-in-point homeless estimates, the homeless population has increased in 46 out of 50 states. That includes Virginia. Maryland, Wyoming, Mississippi, and Iowa are the only exceptions. However, in 2024, Virginia was among the states with the lowest rates of increase in the homeless population, 0.8 homeless individuals for every 1,000 people. We'll look at this issue deeper at the August 19th meeting. Today's speakers will provide so much interesting data, and I'll let each speaker introduce themselves and then give their presentation. Welcome all, and speakers, welcome Hamilton Lombard.
Good morning. That's working okay? Well, I'm Hamilton Lombard. I'm from the University of Virginia's Weldon Cooper Center. I work over in its demographic division where we project the future population for Virginia, and we try to estimate each year how Virginia's population is changing. It's a pleasure to be back here and to speak to you all again this year. I'm going to, in this presentation, initially give you a bit of an overview of some of the demographic shifts we've seen in Virginia over the past year. I think the significant trend we've seen over this past year really is a continuation of what we've seen since the pandemic, which has been more households, particularly younger households, moving out of higher cost metro areas to lower ones. We've seen this at elevated levels since 2020, and we've seen this continue into 2024 despite the higher interest rates. In the second section, I'm going to look a little bit more at one specific segment, which is the younger adult households. Those are the most sensitive typically to household prices because they don't have equity in homes. Often they're buying the first home. We've seen the highest migration rates for them. They've driven most of the shift in migration we're seeing out of larger urban areas. And then in this last section, I'm going to spend just a couple minutes looking at two larger demographic trends I think that are going to push housing demand possibly even higher over the next 10 years than we've seen in the last decade. So starting off here, just looking at Virginia's annual change in population, we've seen it rise over the past year quite a bit. Right now, Virginia's population is growing about the highest rate we've seen in a decade. That pickup might seem a bit unusual, but we've often seen growth in Virginia pick up with interest rates going up. More people stay put, stay in areas like North Virginia while we continue to attract immigrants from overseas. So we tend to see a bit of a population growth when you have higher interest rates. We saw something similar during the late 2000s recession. Over the 2010s, we saw growth slow and slow and slow as you had low interest rates and a long run of economic growth. More people were moving out of areas like North Virginia. By the time you got up to the pandemic, Virginia's population growth was basically the slowest we'd seen since the Civil War. So now we're starting to see it pick back up again with higher interest rates. One factor that's also really helped push up growth in Virginia this past year has been immigration. According to the Census Bureau, last year we had the highest levels of immigration to the U.S. on record. A lot of this was driven by the expansion in the humanitarian programs from 2022 to 2024. North Virginia, Washington, D.C. is one of the biggest destinations for immigrants in the country. So we've seen more growth in North Virginia this past year than we'd seen following the pandemic. Even with that growth from immigration, though, when you look at some localities in North Virginia and the D.C. area, they still haven't got back to levels from before the pandemic. Fairfax County's population is still smaller now than it was before the pandemic, despite these higher levels of migration. One other factor that has helped push up growth in Virginia as a whole is the fact that last year we returned to having more people coming in from other states than going out. First time we'd seen that in over a decade. This chart here shows Virginia's balance of migration with other states each year. Again, this fits a bit into what you'd expect. When you have higher interest rates, you'd expect more people to stay put, more people to stay in areas like North Virginia. What has been interesting is that we are seeing more people stay in North Virginia, but when you look at this data and break it down by region of Virginia, you see that North Virginia on the right there is still shedding a large amount of residents each year to other parts of the country. The real shift we've seen in Virginia over the last 10 years has been these small metro areas, these rural counties, and also the Richmond metro area, pulling in a lot more new residents. And that's offsetting some of the migration we see coming out of North Virginia. In many cases, it appears those areas are actually pulling those people coming out of North Virginia. We used to have this pattern where we saw many people going out of North Virginia, Raleigh or Charlotte. We're seeing a lot more signs of them going to areas like Roanoke, going to Richmond. There was some data that came out from Census Bureau last fall, and it showed that when you looked at people who were working who moved out of North Virginia to Richmond and Roanoke, half of them were working fully remote. In many cases, keeping those North Virginia jobs, paying Virginia taxes, but relocating to an area that was more affordable to live in. This map shows you similar data for Virginia as a whole. A lot going on there, but one big observation, it's showing you the areas that are attracting more than they're losing in red, orange, or that tan. There are relatively few counties in blue that are losing more than they're attracting. Right now, we're seeing the largest number of counties in Virginia attracting new residents that we've seen on record. So very widespread growth, not concentrated necessarily in specific areas. The big area where we're seeing the highest levels of growth, that big red area there, is between Richmond and North Virginia. A lot of that area's had a pickup in growth. It was growing fast before the pandemic. It's just picked up since then. We're also seeing a lot of growth going out to the Middle Peninsula, out to the Northern Neck. Westmoreland, Middlesex are attracting the highest number of residents we've seen on record. When you zoom out a bit and look at the country as a whole, this really fits into what we're seeing happening in other states as well. This chart just shows the number of counties with fewer than 100,000 residents in the U.S. that are attracting more new residents than they're losing. There was a big pickup in the pandemic, much more widespread growth, many more counties attracting. But what's really been remarkable is when you look at 2024, we're not seeing that trend going back to pre-pandemic. We're still seeing far more people moving out of larger metro areas into these smaller localities. Many of them are on the edges of metro areas, places like Prince George County, places like Louisa. We're also seeing a continued migration into smaller localities that have natural amenities. Places like Mecklenburg, Grayson are pulling in considerably more residents than they were a few years ago. There are, I think, several different factors driving this. We've been tracking some of them. I discussed some of these last year, so I won't spend too much time again on them, but one has been remote work. When I spoke to you all last year, there were fewer days worked remotely last year than this year. It's not a trend that's been going away. It's actually gained strength over the past year, despite lots of different articles about people going back in the office, the federal announcement. When you look on the national level, that's not really moving the needle. The net impact, though, is that you have a much wider commuter shed for job centers, people who can live hours away instead of half an hour or an hour away. Data on remote workers has been hard to get, in part because it's a fairly new phenomenon. A lot of statistical agencies haven't caught up with that. But there was a data set that came out in December from the Census Bureau that showed that in Virginia, just from 2019 to 2022, there was a growth of about 24,000 workers who were based in Washington, D.C., where the jobs were, but they were living in Southern Virginia. When you think about the typical remote worker in the D.C. area has a six-figure salary, having an additional 24,000, the equivalent of the Pentagon employment in Southern Virginia within a few years, has likely had a significant economic impact on these other parts of Virginia. I think you're seeing that when you look at the migration data. I think you're seeing that if you look at some of the housing data. You're also seeing in other areas too. One is having this additional spending power. We're seeing new business creation, as shown in this chart, much higher in rural counties as of 2024 compared to 2019 than we see in our larger urban areas. Again, this fits into a trend you're seeing happen around the country with high rates of new business creation in smaller towns and rural counties. And that continued into 2024 despite the higher interest rates. I think one element that's been driving this has been how much better just the economies are in some of these small counties, these rural towns, than they were in the past. I think another element as well is just the cost of living difference. The cost of opening up a business in some of these larger urban areas is so much higher now than small towns. If the risk isn't as low in these small towns, you're seeing more business creation, more jobs being created, and that in turn is just pulling in more people into some of these towns. This chart here just shows you the home value over time for some of Virginia's larger metro areas. There's been a gap between North Virginia and some of these other areas for a long time, but I think the run-up in prices you saw during the pandemic basically put housing out of reach, the idea of buying a home for far more young adults in areas like Northern Virginia. You see the same thing if you look at LA, San Francisco, and in turn you have far more younger adults moving out of these areas because they don't see themselves getting on the housing ladder in the future. It's one of the reasons why I think even with higher interest rates, you're still seeing these high levels of migration out of large urban areas. Traditionally, you don't see that. There is data from the Federal Reserve showing that as of the first quarter of this year, migration out of high-cost metro areas was still 58% higher than it was before the pandemic. In this next section here, I'm going to look a little bit more at this connection between the migration trends we're seeing in housing. I think a key point is that even though I think the shortage of housing we have in some of these larger metro areas, the lack of affordable housing is a problem across the population, We do see certain segments of the population, particularly young adults trying to get on the housing ladder, trying to buy a new home, being more affected by it. And that's causing most of the migration into these smaller towns, rural areas, most of the migration out of Northern Virginia to be driven by younger adults. This chart just shows us the homeownership rate for 25 to 34-year-olds in Virginia over time. There was a general pattern after the financial crisis of homeownership rates dropping for younger adults. They've rebounded a little bit. But when you go back to 2005, Northern Virginia had the highest homeownership rate for younger adults. Today, it's the lowest. At the same time, if you look at these small metro areas, these rural counties in Virginia, in that dark line, it now has the highest homeownership rate. And this is helping fuel some of the migration that we're seeing coming into these smaller towns and rural counties. This chart shows us the change in the population age 25 to 44 for the larger metro areas in Virginia and for the remainder of Virginia. And we're looking at the 4 years we have data for in light blue since 2020, and then the 4 years, the first years of the 2010s. You can see the shift that has happened where Northern Virginia still has had some growth in that age range, but that's entirely been driven by the surge in immigration. Otherwise, when you look at the population in Northern Virginia, its younger adult population would have shrunk without immigration. At the same time, we're seeing it pick up in these smaller towns, these rural areas. We're seeing it pick up in the Richmond metro area, really lining up with this housing price, looking for more affordable housing. A lot of it's being driven by younger families. This is a chart shows similar data, but just looking at the population under 5. Again, Northern Virginia went from having most of the growth in this population with younger families to now seeing the largest declines. It's something you're seeing really around the country again in these high-cost areas. Last year, I was asked to speak to Prince William County School Board, and one issue they were facing is that they've been building new housing almost like clockwork, or new schools like clockwork, as the number of families have grown in the area. But they were noticing that they weren't seeing those numbers anymore, and they're losing more families. Births in Prince William County are down about 10% over the last 10 years from losing families. If you go up to Fairfax, they're down by 20%. If you go to Arlington, they're down by 30% over that period. When you have declines on that scale, it is going to impact schools, but in the longer term, it's going to have an impact on their economy. Most of the workforce in those communities is coming from people who grew up there. If your child population is shrinking, on the long run, your workforce is going to be shrinking. You're going to have to bring in more workers from everywhere else. But right now, a lot of these high-cost metro areas are struggling because of the lack of housing to keep or attract more workers. A lot of high-cost metro areas around the country, including Northern Virginia, have really struggled the last few years in adding more housing. This chart just looks at Virginia at homes permitted for construction of the last decade. Northern Virginia is building less housing now than it was before the pandemic, despite the run-up in housing prices. But when you look at some of these lower-cost metro areas in Virginia, you look at the rural counties, they've seen a pretty considerable increase in new home construction across the board. The Shenandoah Valley and Lynchburg area have seen some of the largest increases in new construction. But it's really broad-based. You see this in the South Side, you see this in Southwest Virginia. The typical county in those areas is about 50% more new homes being built right now than in 2019. But if you compare that to what you saw in the 1990s and 2000s, they're still building only about a third as many homes as they were building then, so much, much lower than in the past. Back in the spring, I was asked to speak at the Southwest Virginia Economic Forum in Wise, and one topic that came up and was one of the key points of the conference was housing. A number of home builders there and bankers pointed out that losing so many young adults over the last couple of decades, they don't have the labor to build housing. So even though they would like to increase housing supply, they're really running at their limits from the lack of labor. A number of home builders reported having to bring in labor from out of state. One said they had to bring in sheetrock layers from Alabama to finish their homes. This chart here shows us the change in home construction for Virginia's metro areas since the pandemic, and on the right for metro areas in neighboring states. One trend that's been pretty obvious since the pandemic is many of our neighboring states have had a greater ability to increase their housing supply since the pandemic than Virginia. When you look at the metro areas with the largest increases, they're mostly our neighbors to the south. North Virginia, Hampton Roads are building less new housing than they were before the pandemic. Some of our smaller metro areas are managing to do that. But Lynchburg only gets on the list on the right if you include it at number 11. The top 10 largest increases by metro areas were all outside of Virginia. In demographics, there's sometimes a bit of a chicken and the egg debate about whether housing drives population growth or population growth drives housing. It depends, I think, on the situation, which one's right. But the last 5 years, I think housing has been driving a lot of the population growth we're seeing. If you look at places like North Carolina and Tennessee, they're building more housing, more young adults are going there. And in turn, businesses are going where the young adults are and also where they know the housing is for those young adults. You have big job centers like Northern Virginia that have high-paying salaries, but they don't have the housing. And so they're tending to lose young adults despite having those opportunities there for them. In this last section here, I'm just going to briefly touch on these two trends, I think, that are going to be a big factor behind demographic trends, I think, over the next decade or so. One is coming from the younger adult population. This chart here shows the homeownership rates for Virginians age 18 to 34, sorry, not homeownership rates, but whether they're living independently. That had been falling for quite some time. The last few years, we've seen that go up from a stronger economy, more people working. It's a great trend to see, but what it means is you have fewer young adults sharing housing with their parents or with roommates and living independently. That's pushing up the demand for housing even further. And when you look out over the next few years, we're going to see a lot more growth in that age ranges where people are forming their own household, buying their first home, or trying to move up. This chart here shows us the change in the past and what we're expecting over the next 15 or so, 20 years in the population age 25-54. We're expecting that growth to really pick up over the next decade, reaching levels about 3 times what we saw during the last decade. A lot of this driven by the larger millennial cohort moving in, replacing Gen X, also the almost as large Generation Z moving in. So the demand coming from this area for housing is not going to slacken, at least over the next decade. It's only going to ramp up, going at least out to 2035. I think you're also going to see continued demand coming from the population over age 65. That maybe has been the biggest demographic trend here in Virginia the last 15 or so years, has just been the rapid growth in the population over 65. Earlier this month, my office released updated population projections, and we expect the next decade most of Virginia's population growth will come from those over 65. Its impact on housing, I think, the growth in the population over 65 is one that I don't think is still that well understood. This chart here shows us the change in the US in the number of owner-occupied households by age. About 80% of the growth in owner-occupied households in the US has come from those over 65 since 2010. Often I think when people look at the growth in the population over 65, it's not seen as necessarily impacting the housing market the same way you might have growth in the population age 25 to 54. But this is easily the wealthiest segment of the population with the highest disposable income. And it's also more mobile, I think, than most people think. I was looking at some data in preparation of this presentation, and if you look at homeowners in the US who are age 65, by the time they're 80, they're more likely than not to have moved and bought another home in that time range, not stayed put. And when you look at the type of homes they buy, they do tend to be pretty different, pretty similar rather to the homes they've moved out of. This chart here shows the type of housing that Americans live in by age. When you're age 80, the typical American is about 80% likely to live in the orange or the gray townhome single-family homes. It's not that different from the share of Americans age 65 who live in single-family homes, Americans age 50 who live in single-family homes. It doesn't change considerably over time. So older adults are more likely to move than maybe many people think, and when they do, they don't tend to downsize nearly as much as people think as well. So when you're thinking about the growth we're going to see in the population over 65, but also in this population age 25 to 54, I think there's going to be more competition for housing between the age groups than I think maybe people typically think. And if we know one age group tends to have higher spending power, they're likely going to win in that competition unless you have more housing supply being built. Otherwise, I think in some of the larger metro areas in Virginia and around the country, you're going to continue to see this pattern of younger adults realizing they're not going to get on the housing ladder there and they have to move. So just to close up here, a couple points I think I tried to cover here was one that with more people working remotely, with the strong economy, young workers are more mobile. They have more options than they did in the past. And I think with that, there's a lot more focus on housing and whether they can afford it. If they can take their job with them, then they can go find housing they want. Areas that aren't able to keep more of those workers are shrinking. Housing's much more connected with growth than it used to be. population growth isn't necessarily good. Decline isn't always bad, but when you see a certain segment of the population declining in some of these areas, I think that is an area of concern, like in Northern Virginia, where we've seen the loss of so many families. And then this last point, that we are going to see, from a demographic area, a strong amount of demand coming for housing, at least over the next decade. It's going to be coming from older adults, but also from a lot of younger ones as well. I think you're going to continue to see a lot of competition for the same type of housing, primarily single-family homes, detached, 3 or more bedrooms. And that's a type of housing that doesn't seem to be getting built enough of lately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamilton. Appreciate the presentation. Are there any questions? Yes.
Hi, I was remembering your presentation, I think it was 2 years ago. You talked about the labor force in Virginia through 2030 remaining flat. Is that still a current projection that you guys see?
Yes, very little growth. The number of Americans, number of Virginians turning 18 is peaking this year, and it's going to start declining. 25 to 54 is sort of an area where you are going to see growth because those smaller cohorts haven't quite moved there yet, and the Gen X has moved out of it, and they're maybe in that older one. But we're not expecting a considerable amount of growth there. I think that the big question there is immigration. Is that going to pick up to fill that? I mean, it's such a political issue. But if you're having labor force shortages, maybe that will pick up. But when you look at the current age structure in Virginia, the migration levels, it's not likely to see much growth in the labor force. It is going to vary if you're looking at the Richmond metro area. I'm sure you're going to have growth there. It may be more in some of these small towns and rural counties than we would have thought. But generally fairly weak for the labor force as a whole.
Other questions? Delegate Bulova.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and really appreciate your presentation. And I'm imagining that the answer to this question is probably scattered amongst the slides that you provided there, and was just hoping you might be able to bring a finer point on it. And so I understand some of those future demographic changes and how that might affect housing supply and need for housing supply over the next couple of decades. I guess what I'm interested in is kind of the more immediate dynamics, because, I mean, as you rightly pointed out, Fairfax County is flat or losing population. Realizing that some people are staying in, but that we're still losing that population. And even though housing growth is not as much as it used to be, we are still seeing an increase in affordable housing and housing in general. So that would seem to indicate that there would be downward pressure on those price points for housing, and yet we haven't seen that. I'm interested in kind of your thoughts about why are we still seeing increasing housing prices when we're seeing population loss and still seeing new housing starts in the region?
Thank you. I think there are maybe a couple of different things going on there. One, if you look at Fairfax County, and I think this is true a lot in Hampton Roads as well, the population is aging pretty quickly. And so you're really going from this dynamic where the typical household not long ago was, say, 2 parents, 2 or 3 kids, down to living alone. And so the demand for housing is still there as household sizes are shrinking. So you keep building new housing, the population doesn't grow, but the number of households is growing. And that's sort of an aging dynamic. And that's something that you're seeing happen throughout Virginia. If you go to look at rural counties in Virginia, there basically have been that same boat where there's a demand for housing, the population is not growing. It's because it's aging, and there's more and more of these older households where they're smaller. I think that's one factor there. I think one other factor in Fairfax, I remember last year, I think it was Richard Schrager from UVA Law came and spoke about Charlottesville with zoning and trying to create more housing. But one point he made is that I think a little like Fairfax, you can do infill. It's going to tend to be apartments. And there is some demand for that. But when you look at it from the demographic angle, that's not the apartments in high demand. As Elizabeth Palin pointed out at the beginning with condos, that's not the item nearly as much demand as single family. But I don't know if Fairfax is, if you look at Northern Virginia as a whole, they're building less single family than they were before. I think there is that focus on infill, but I think it has a limited ability. Very, very, very few families with children will live in an apartment. I think nationally, about 8 or 9 times more likely to live in single family. And so what people want is going to push the prices, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And I guess, Madam Chair, if I can, so I think the conundrum isn't so much that we aren't building new housing. It's just not the type of housing that's going to be attractive to new families, looking for that single family home. And so perhaps our dearth is that affordable range of single family homes, rather than, the all of the above strategy with respect to housing types.
I think that's 100% Delegate Blova. I think that there has been such a big focus the last 20 years on density, and I think it's really admirable. And it worked really well when you had the large millennial cohort renting. But now you're seeing them moving to the age where they want to have a home, typically single family. You're seeing a lot of growth in the older population, which again wants it. I don't think that's where the market is, even though that's what the push is for density.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Welborn, and then we have a question from Delegate Corner.
I'm just curious, exactly how many units short?
I don't know if we know an exact one, but that is something I believe Ryan Price is going to really touch on. There are various estimates. I think he's got a good one he's going to share with you as well. I think it's significant, and I think it's one that even if you increase construction levels for a decade, it's probably not going to get filled.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two questions. The first, when you look at your slide 17, and you look at the home building surge, and it says in states south of Virginia, but it's really North Carolina, other than a couple hot spots in Tennessee. Wondering if you can share anything you saw in your research. North Carolina is #1 for business right now. They're #1 in new home construction. Do you see correlations or things we can learn from what they're doing that seems to be more effectively handling the single-family construction than in our state?
I think there have been kind of a combination of factors. I think one is that North Carolina traditionally has had an economy that's not been as wealthy, and so there has been this view that having an economy where you're doing construction, where you're geared towards vacation, you're building condos, as being an element is a really good part. Virginia hasn't had to have that, but if you look at Northern Virginia's economy, construction has been there, but there's so many great jobs. It's not really where the economy is. So I think in some ways our economy have gone in different ways, and that maybe is hurting us a little bit now. I think there is a whole element there with regulations, which is not in my area of expertise, but I'm somewhat aware that North Carolina, I think you can drive through the state, has different regulations than Virginia. And I think that has been a big area. It's been a big problem. You have areas like Clark, Fauquier, which are absolutely beautiful. They've done a wonderful job in preserving the landscape, but you've effectively made a green belt around Washington, D.C. It's very hard to build the single-family housing that's in demand because the land's not preserved. North Carolina generally doesn't have that in place. I was speaking to the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission a month ago, and Charlottesville is very similar. It effectively has a green belt. That has pushed housing prices there up to being some of the highest in the country. Again, you go to North Carolina, they don't have that stringent. So I think a lot of it does go back to land use regulation, but some of it just, I think the economy, the way we've geared Virginia's economy in large part, has not been towards that. Even when you go into rural counties, that hasn't been the focus of our education system to really try to produce students who would do that. I personally took masonry in high school, but the push was don't do masonry for a living, go to college, I'm here. I lay bricks at home, that's it. But I remember taking those classes and told don't do it. It could be that Tennessee and North Carolina don't have that focus as much, and they do realize that you do need to have construction workers in your economy, and those are good jobs.
Second question, different issue. You were talking about the decrease in desire for condo units. But, I can only speak for the Richmond region. That's where I do most of my legal practice and work. So when we look at apartments, most of our apartment developments heavily rely on loans, and those loans are only able to be obtained when a market study has been done and you can prove there's not only a current demand, but a lengthy demand. And most of our apartments in the Richmond region are sitting at full capacity with wait lists. I actually tried to find an apartment for a VCU student, could not find one affordable in the city. So can you help us understand when, you talked about infill and that's happening in certain areas, but the demands on single family, how we balance that with what we're seeing with new startups with apartments that we know wouldn't be coming online, but for not only a current demand, but in the foreseeable future?
I think, as Delegate Blova talked about, the all or above, I think that is true. There is demand across the board. It's simply stronger for the single family. And I think the prices maybe are showing that. One thing you do have unique with apartments, maybe not condos, but with apartments, people's leases are turning over every year. So if you build a new apartment, you can fill that up. It's the older ones that move down right. We've seen this in Harrisburg, Blacksburg, Charlottesville, where a lot of the older student apartments get turned into something else. Even though UVA's enrollment's not growing anymore, they're adding several thousand new apartment units because they know parents will rent those and they can fill those up. So I think it's not to say there is no demand for apartments. I think when you look at the market, and I think when you look at the demographics, it's simply a lot stronger for single family, and it's probably going to continue to be strong. But I wouldn't give any investment advice, but I think the demand for apartments, particularly in the Richmond metro area, out of any area, is going to remain strong. It's probably just going to be stronger for single family.
Thank you so very much for your presentation and for answering the questions. We will now move to Ryan Price from the Virginia Association of Realtors.
Good morning, commissioners. Thanks for having me back. I'm Ryan with the Realtors, Chief Economist. And today we're going to walk through sort of an update on how Virginia's economy has fared so far in 2025, some of the key highlights that are starting to emerge in the data and the indicators that we track. We're also going to look at kind of the broader economy in the U.S. and then pivot to the housing market specifically, dive into some regional trends, and then we are going to talk a bit about that supply shortage that came up. We have done some calculations on that and are excited to share that information. So the economic indicators, these are certainly not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the key ones that we track that are pointing towards fragility, really, I think, in the economy overall. But we're still seeing job growth when you look at the U.S. as a whole. Certainly not as strong as we had maybe last year, but we are still adding jobs to the economy. A lot of these are healthcare related jobs, construction jobs. We've seen a big uptick in that nationwide. There's the top line number there for the U.S. Again, still pretty robust job growth, and so I think that this is weighing heavily, on when the Fed is kind of trying to make their decision, and they're still seeing that the economy, in terms of the job market, is expanding, which makes interest rate cuts less likely, at least in the near term. Now, when we look at Virginia's job growth, a little bit different picture. So we're still adding jobs, we're still having growth, but it really has waned from last year. Fairly stable, but we've seen some losses in some very key sectors in our economy, which we're going to get into in a moment. But the top line number there in Virginia through May, we got just over 1,000 additional jobs. Each of those bars, represents the numeric change in thousands of jobs each month. And so 2025, other than a little bit of a spike there in March, really flat job growth so far. Now, when we get to the sectors, this is really important when we're thinking about housing, because the wage levels of these jobs will determine the type of housing that's likely in demand. Now, construction really has been our booming sector so far this year, and I think that speaks to the level of single-family construction that has increased, but this is also industrial construction, warehousing, a lot of that has been happening, road construction, things like that. But then the other sectors, retail trade, healthcare, local government, these are mostly educators within that sector, a lot more teachers being hired. But then the other side of the column there is really where we're having our impact up in Washington. We're seeing the federal government sector get hit pretty hard. So far, this is January compared to May, seasonally adjusted to almost 9,000 fewer Fed government jobs in the state. And then professional and technical, a lot of these tend to be the contractors, the federal contractors. And so we're seeing that sector being hit as well. Just a reminder, and I know you guys don't need this, but we're very vulnerable. Virginia is, in terms of our exposure to shifts in the federal employment landscape. We have the second most jobs in the entire country of federal civilian workers, even behind much larger economies like Florida and Texas. So we certainly are paying very close attention to this data because the impacts could be significant. Quick top line numbers, this is really kind of sobering. We have almost 900,000 jobs in Virginia that are related to the government in some fashion, whether it be direct civilian employment, whether it be military active duty. And then the big kind of the big one there, and this Weldon Cooper actually estimated this, the federal contracting space, about 441,000 of those jobs throughout Virginia's economy. So how are the regions faring? When we look at the MSAs, the metropolitan areas, we are seeing, if we did this table last year, almost every MSA was experiencing job growth. At this point in time, we're seeing a lot more losses in this table. Richmond, continues to outperform most of the metros. Little bit of a head scratcher in Northern Virginia showing job growth. We dove into those numbers. The federal government sector in Northern Virginia has certainly declined. Professional business has certainly declined, but those drops have been offset by healthcare jobs, by construction jobs, and also by local government jobs, the educators. So, but really, I think those two sectors have put a damper on that job growth. And then Hampton Roads, we're seeing drops in the federal government as well, drops in professional and technical, but also other sectors. Much more declines across many sectors, like manufacturing has had a loss in Hampton Roads. So I think that economy is getting hit more so than the other one that is subject to the federal government cuts, Northern Virginia. Richmond growth really mimics the nation as a whole: healthcare, construction, local government. Our unemployment has been climbing. It's still at a pretty healthy level here in the state. We're lower than the U.S., which is pretty typical. But we have, if you look at these lines here, that orange line is us, Virginia. We have been really drifting up for pretty much the entirety of 2025. So we're at mid threes right now, and I suspect that that's going to continue to increase as the results of the federal cuts continue to trickle into the data. We do know that we've been outpacing, last year and certainly 2023 when we look at the weekly unemployment claim numbers. Now, if you look kind of in the weeds on that, it's not all, what you would expect from the headlines. You see these mass layoffs at certain agencies. A lot of that is not in Virginia. But, we are seeing some, manufacturing losses in some parts of Virginia so far. But when you look at really this is initial claims. So as soon as someone is unemployed, they file for unemployment insurance. This is the initial claim. But if you look at continued claims, this really, I think, speaks to the pervasiveness of these job losses in the economy, outpacing last year. And again, a lot of this is DOGE related and other sectors as well. But I would, one thing I forgot to mention on this one. So a lot of those cuts that have been announced, the various federal agencies are going through their RIFs, the reduction in force processes. And so those decisions really are ongoing. They haven't been made yet. And then there's a lot of government workers that are still on payroll that are likely going to end in the fall. And so I don't think that we've seen the brunt of these job losses yet. Let's check in on consumer sentiment. That was the job market. Now we're talking consumer sentiment. Again, we care about consumer sentiment because it impacts what we spend. And consumer spending is 70% of the entire U.S. economy. Consumer sentiment has deteriorated so far in 2025. And it's, we got different metrics to look at. We got different surveys to help us hone in on what people are feeling. The Conference Board survey has been drifting down most of 2025. Did see a little bit of a recovery there in May. I think people started to become less pessimistic. They're still pessimistic, just less so about inflation. I think there was a lot of rhetoric that there was going to be a surge in pricing. Haven't really seen that play out yet. We have seen a little bit of drifting, which we'll get into next. But overall, if you just step back and take a look at the year so far, sentiment has worsened. And this is spilling into the housing market, I should mention. Sentiment for housing purchasing has also fallen for much of the year. Here's one example of these indices. This is the University of Michigan Sentiment Index. You see pretty big drop there in 2025, notable drop. little bit of an uptick in June. Again, that is driven by lower pessimism. So they're still not feeling good about inflation, but just a little bit not as bad. But the important connection here is that we haven't really seen spending take a big hit. We haven't seen that yet. It has started to show signs of weakening. We've seen a little bit of you can see it the line kind of drifting there at the end, but compared to what people are saying they're feeling, much steeper drop there than the actual spending. So I think that people are pulling back on kind of bigger ticket items, but we're still seeing folks spend their money in the economy, which is why GDP continues to grow. Now we got to check in on inflation. We just got a fresh batch of data come out this morning. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, is actually up again. So the June data, these charts reflect last month's data, but June data came in, we're at 2.7% for a top line number, 2.9% for the core. A lot of that growth was related to shelter, the shelter component of inflation. We've also seen some increases in clothing, like apparel and kind of home furnishings, which potentially could be related to the tariffs. But I think a lot of the tariff impacts still have not necessarily hit inflation. The personal consumptions expenditures is PCE. Another way to take a look at it, this has also been drifting up recently. So inflation is still in a pretty good spot. But we were sort of the slope was downward, and now we're sort of edging back up in inflation. And so this is another thing that the Fed is monitoring very closely and likely to see, more data come in and hopefully enough to make decision on the interest rate. Right now, it looks like probably in the fall is where we might see that first cut this year. But they're going to be monitoring the data as it comes in. Now let's pivot to the housing market. So that's where we are with the economy. Quite a bit of uncertainty, but still holding up fairly well. When we look at the housing market, we can't start without talking about interest rates because it's very much a rate-sensitive market right now, and it just hasn't improved. It really hasn't improved over the past few years. We know what happened there in 2021 and 2, fairly traumatic doubling of the interest rate. But even 2023, we're almost 2.5 years removed from that now, and we're still in the upper sixes for a 30-year fixed. The average this year has been 6.8. We did see a little bit of retreating in the past month or so, but that's since gone away. We're still back up to 6 3/4 for a 30-year fixed. And so what this is doing is it's continuing this lock-in effect that we've been talking about now for a couple of years, where folks, the interest rate that they have on their mortgage, the homeowners, is just so far removed from where they would get an interest rate if they sold their home and acquired a new mortgage. The aqua line, I think I showed this chart last year. The aqua line shows what folks have in Virginia. This is, any mortgage that is in Virginia. The average rate is 4.1. They went out on the open market, you're looking at a 6.8. As that gap does narrow, which we do think it will over time, because the longer time that passes between the rate jump, you're going to have folks who got in after the rate jump. And so those folks are going to eventually want to sell their home. So as those lines drift together, I do expect that we're going to see the lock-in effect loosen. We're already starting to see evidence of that. But the reality is a lot of the tightness in the inventory is due to this lock-in effect, and then also under production. This is annual permits by state, just sort of our regional kind of southern mid-Atlantic peers here. And you can see Virginia, dark black line, very flat growth there over the past 15 years since the housing bubble popped and we had the mortgage crisis. We haven't really recovered our building construction compared to North Carolina, as Hamilton showed, South Carolina, Tennessee. These are smaller states than us, and they're outpacing our construction levels, which really speaks to that shortage that we continue to face. So speaking of the shortage, we calculated this. We took a look at really what is that demand that's out there, and we hear a lot about it. And so what we did was we isolated the households that are in Virginia, that existing households that are likely in demand for another unit, but also importantly, households that don't exist that would exist if they had a house to move into. So those are not captured in the data. You have to estimate those. So we're talking like, adult children living with their parents, well into their 20s, into their 30s. We're talking, multiple families residing in a single family home that are unrelated to each other. We're talking, senior downsizers, long-term renters. And so we looked at all these different cohorts that are in Virginia, and we came up with about 188,000 is the number that we're currently short across the state. Going to be a lot of variability by metro area, but then, if you take into effect or consideration our population growth projections as well as the job growth projections, this actually worsens. At the current pace of construction, we're likely to see that deficit increase to about 214 within the next half a decade, so by 2030. So, you just do the numbers on this, and it's pretty scary. I don't know that it's going to take a lot of changes in the production levels to really start to crack into this number to make a big dent in it. But I think the important thing here is not just the shortage, but really the impacts that shortage can have and potentially already are having on our economic competitiveness. As Hamilton showed very well in his slides, the migration patterns sort of away from our job centers, our labor pool has been accelerating. And we're going to walk through a few examples of, those wage levels and the housing mismatch here in a moment. But we have, the good news is that we are seeing more listings. This is particularly true in Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads. We're definitely seeing more listings out there, but it's still relatively tight conditions. It's still an imbalance. If we look at it kind of regionally, Winchester, Northern Virginia, all double-digit growth. These are new listings. These are new sellers that have put their home on the market so far this year. So you add them up every month, January through May. We get our June data today, by the way, so we'll be sure to update these slides for you. But yeah, it's been pretty much across the board. We're seeing more inventory. It's just not enough. We still, we're looking at less than 3 months of supply statewide. When you go to the kind of the job centers, the urban crescent, much lower than that, less than two months there in Northern Virginia. Harrisonburg's right at 2. Really just pretty tight market conditions, even with those additional listings. Sales activity has been quite sluggish so far, and this is not unique to Virginia. This has been a national trend. We have seen the 2025 market trail the 2024 market. And then the 2024 market was the slowest we've had in more than a decade. So we're below where we were last year. 2 factors there. I think it's really the mortgage rates haven't improved, and a lot of affordability concerns are still out there. But then there's also this whole kind of economic job uncertainty prospects that have, I think, had people shy away from entering the housing market that may have otherwise would have. This is occurring in most places, really across the board. We're seeing slower closed sales activity, and this is not, you're going to see some pockets in sort of the rural markets, but most of the job centers, the MSAs, you're seeing fewer home sales. Home prices are still climbing, but I will mention that this has cooled somewhat. The growth has cooled. We're looking still at about a 5% increase statewide, which is above that sort of the average range of 2 to 3%. So we're still running a little bit hot on the price growth, but it is starting to taper. It really is that rate is starting to decrease. And we're seeing that probably the most in Hampton Roads, Winchester. It really is, it's very local. You're going to have pockets of these regions where you're going to have prices dip. We're starting to see that in some areas, but overall, it's still growing just at a slower pace. Now, talking about the kind of that link between jobs and housing, very important link. And so this is the same chart we looked at about the job growth, and just wanted to throw out a few scenarios, kind of example jobs where, you could do this for any variety of jobs in any community in the state, and you would see similar patterns. So for example, we're seeing a lot of growth in healthcare across the state. So Henrico County, you have an average annual wage, about $82,000. This is going to be very much a spectrum depending on your qualifications, things like that. But, so that's about an 80 to 120 AMI job, area median income. And so when you just do some really rough math on that, sort of back of the napkin math, you're looking at about a $275,000 unit is what the purchasing power is for that job. Now, we know it's not that simple. We know that a lot of people have dual income households, but a lot of people don't have dual income households. And so, these are, for simplification, we're just assuming a single income household here. $275,000 price point, about a $2,000 rent payment is what is affordable. When you look at the market out there, this is probably not a shocker for anybody who lives in Henrico County. It's just not a lot of the market. It's about 15% of sales are in that $275 or below price point last year. It's probably worse now than last year. And then the rent payment, the average rent's about $1,700, so probably could find a rental unit at that $2K price point. But again, likely the for sale market's likely out of reach for that wage level in that job. Take a look down in Hampton Roads. We had a lot of growth in construction workers. Again, going to be a wide spectrum depending on your trade, but about 70, mid-70s, 80 to 120 AMI. You're looking at about 240 for that unit, and 1,800 if you look out in the market. Very small portion of Virginia Beach you could get at 240. And the rental market there, you probably could still find a rental unit. One last scenario, over in Harrisonburg, a professional services worker, faring a little bit better in this community, about $80,000 is the average wage there. And, so you're looking at kind of upper twos, mid twos for sale, about $2,000 for rent. A little bit less than half of the market in Harrisonburg went for $240,000 or less. So probably a little bit easier for this worker to crack into the for sale market, and certainly could, afford the average rent level there in that community. So to wrap it up, we still have a competitive market even though it is slower. And this is unusual because, if you think about slower sales, you think, well, that means if I'm a buyer out there, I have more options. And it is true that the pendulum is swinging a little bit back towards the buyer's favor. We're seeing less, multiple offer situations, but we're still seeing them. But we're seeing more cases where buyers are able to request inspection, which unfortunately a couple years ago wasn't even possible. And so we are starting to see it shift back, but the reality is the supply-demand imbalance, the pent-up demand that is still out there in the market, even with the additional inventory, even with the slower sales activity, it's still competitive. Sellers are getting about their asking price on average, and this is occurring in most regions in the state. So in summary, we have a job market that has slowed in Virginia. A lot of this is due to the DOGE cuts, and we likely have not seen the full scope of that. We're likely to see that increase. Our consumers out there have soured, but they're still spending. We're seeing a little bit of evidence that it's starting to slow down the spending, but it hasn't really occurred yet, a big drop-off. We have had a sluggish housing market so far, mirroring the national trends, really driven by affordability challenges and no improvements in the interest rate. But we have seen more sellers. Seller activity has picked up. So we're seeing more sellers list their homes. Despite this lower volume, we are still seeing prices generally increase. Again, it's slowing down, but not quite as much growth. Some pockets of the state will see some price corrections, but the reality is that imbalance is there. The shortage, about 188,000 units, is really what's keeping that pent-up demand, is keeping the price point somewhat insulated. And then the last bullet point is just sort of a takeaway. If we want to continue to be competitive, our labor force is really very valuable for Virginia, highly educated labor force when you compare it to other states. And we really need to focus on retaining those folks in our state. And one way to do that is to increase the housing supply. All right, I think that's the last slide I had, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so very much for this very thorough presentation. Are there any questions? Delegate Bulova.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for a very informative presentation. I was hoping you could paint us kind of a practical picture of what things would look like if we were able to achieve that additional housing. So you'd put in that we have a gap of 187,000 in 2025 and 213,000 in 2030. And I appreciate that specificity. That's very helpful in terms of targeting. But I wanted to see what does that mean if we were to achieve that with respect to Virginia's population. So does that mean a X% reduction in housing prices? Does it mean X% reduction of the amount of income that you have that is spent on housing? X% reduction in terms of how much commuting time that you're going to have, because you're able to move closer to your job. I'm just curious whether you've gamed out those metrics as far as if we were able to achieve that gap.
Yeah.
What does that really mean from a constituent's perspective?
That is a very good question. No, we have not gamed it out. We don't have specific numbers. Potentially a phase 2 of our calculation, but I think that really the broader impacts would be population growth. From not just from international migration, which is what we've been having more recently, but domestically. So I think we would see fewer people moving out of Virginia. I think we would see more people moving into Virginia, particularly see an increase in those, the retirees that are moving here. Because a big chunk of that 188,000, is for the seniors that are looking for smaller footprints, things like that. So I think we would have population growth. I think we would have job growth. I think the price points would level off. Our pricing, when you compare it to other states, has been increasing at a faster rate. And so I do think that would level off and probably drop in some places. But the reality is the level of price growth has been unhealthy. And so even seeing it flatten, I think, could be a positive thing for the economy. And so while we don't have a specific number on if we had 188, it's gonna, the prices are gonna do that. I think the general direction is economic growth, population growth, and higher home ownership rates.
Thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Welborn.
Madam Chair, I'm just curious about tariffs and the cost, and you just kind of talked about it a little bit now. How much do we anticipate that the housing will increase possibly due to any tariffs, or do we not know that yet?
We haven't seen it go up yet, but the builders have estimated about a $10,000 potential increase per unit based on the tariffs. But as we've seen, the tariffs, very fluid situation. But I think the general consensus is if we see those tariffs enacted, particularly on places where we import a lot of construction materials, would translate into higher new construction costs. But the number I've seen is about 10,000 per unit. Yep.
Mr. Goldschmidt.
There it is. Thanks for your presentation. I really enjoyed that. I'm a home builder and also a licensed realtor. We are seeing an increase in land, and it's not something that is, when you go under contract for a parcel and then you go through the zoning process. We just completed a zoning locally that took 3 years. We are seeing an increase in price that is much greater than any of these other increases. And my question is, we're aware of the Richmond region, we're in Southwest Virginia. as an economist for the realtors, I mean, I know it's a very hard question, but how are you guys thinking about it? Are you trying to track it? I mean, the local home builders have started quantifying what's being consumed versus what's being zoned and produced, and it's a big negative number. And just wondering if you guys are starting to, and I know it's a very difficult question, so I'm not trying to.
Land.
Lot production. You said production was the issue in catching up, and I know coming out of the pandemic and with inflation, we thought about labor.
Yeah.
With this lower demand, in our experience, labor is somewhat stabilized. The tariffs weren't as bad as we thought they were going to be. But this land issue, greater than lumber, greater than labor, I mean, it's much, much more challenging. And, we were talking about North Carolina and those places that have less regulation. And the question really is just how are, at a state level, how's the association thinking about even, then ultimately weighing in on the policy around it?
So, to start off, I'll say our data does not track the land sales. So all those charts you saw up there, those are existing homes. Some of those are going to be, some builders do put their listings in the MLSs, but when you're at the land acquisition phase, you're not going to see those listings in there. So that's the first thing. I do think that the number of lots that are available, the developable land, is certainly a shrinking commodity here. And I do think that is potentially driving up a lot of those costs and a lot of interest from, national builders that are coming in, and, bidding up I would imagine bidding up some of those tracts. What types of, I'm kind of questioning back at you, what types of land have you seen these astronomical kind of price growth? All of them. Wow, all of them.
If you're in a room talking to people in the business, we just talk about blanks, right? So if you get something zoned, and if you get into larger tracts, you don't even know what you're going to put, and you're trying to come up with a per door price, the same way the apartment developers do. So if you're in a room with people in the land acquisition business, it's per door, and that door can be a 16-foot townhome or a 4,000 square foot house, and it's just variable. And then you start thinking about what it costs per lot. I mean, the back of the napkin is scary, and then you play it out, and it's much scarier.
And the entities that are buying a lot of this land, have you seen any patterns with that? Is it like data centers? Are we talking?
No, as an industry, well, when you think about it, your data shows the demand in Northern Virginia. Mm-hmm. And if you look, I mean, we don't track it, but if you look at Northern Virginia, if you go look at a house being built, I'd say, man, that looks like it costs this. The land to home value, where we may see in Richmond, we like to be 25% or less in Central Virginia. They may be 30 or 40% or more up there. We believe it's shifting in this market very fluidly, like that when we wake up in 3 years, it will have shifted. But I understand how hard it is to track, so I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I mean, the only way we think about tracking it, and it's so local, are in zoning cases. Mm-hmm. Sitting on this board, it's really interesting because I think about Delegate Marshall talking about needing lots in Danville for economic development and their industrial authority putting them on the ground. And then what we see with the regulatory environment and the political environment, the pushback on lots in high demand housing markets. I mean, again, it's an interesting dynamic.
Kind of forces,
Very much so.
Yeah. So. But that's really, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to try to get my hands on some data potentially on that.
I'll catch up with you after this. I got a couple sources that we use, so thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so very much for your presentation. We'll now move to agenda item number 3 with Kathy Ritter, who will talk to us about Eden Village, for which she is the founder.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm not a professional speaker, but I am passionate about Eden Village, so I'll do my best. Okay, the first one. This saying came up at a conference I went to in Springfield, Missouri. Eden Village is like kind of like a franchise, so there's 12 of us starting across the United States, or 4 have already. But I love this saying from Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much, because it truly is going to take the community coming together trying to solve the problem of homelessness and affordable housing. So that is one of our sayings. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to this point to do this. My husband and I are from the Winchester area, and we moved here 7 years ago. And back there, I was an early childhood educator, started a preschool, daycare, and after-school program. But more importantly, I started a food pantry at our church and coordinated it for 15 years, and took youth to Appalachia to rebuild homes for people for 10 years. And so I've always had a passion for this type of thing. So when I moved to Richmond, I thought I wasn't going to get involved in a bunch of stuff, but that didn't last very long. And got involved with 2 homeless organizations that were helping the homeless, and buying tents, clothes, shoes, all that stuff. And it turned out the lady that was providing the food for the people with the one organization started letting them send up she was serving them in the parking lot to make it easier to serve the people. And then eventually started letting people set up tents on the property. This is on Oliver Hill Way at an overflow shelter that VCU owned. And it turned out to be 120 tents were set up. And you just can't, it was a good thing, but you just can't set up a whole bunch of tents on a piece of property like that. So here's the picture. Oops, am I pushing the right one? There. Okay, yeah, this is the picture of the tents, and this has nothing to do with me. It was called Kathy's tent camp. But anyway, so they came and they took down the tents, which I completely understand, but they had a number on them. Each person had a place to keep their belongings, but the tents got torn down. And it was at this point I said, thank goodness people provide food and everything for these people, but we need a permanent solution to homelessness. So I started researching what other cities and counties were doing across the United States and found this Eden Village model. And even though I've started several things, this was a little bit above my head. So the good thing about this, they give you plans for the houses, the community center, leases, and everything. So I went and one was starting in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I was able to go visit that and thought, yeah, this is what we need to do. So for 3.5 years, I tried to find land that would work for this, and the ideal scenario would be for a mobile home park, which they don't even allow that kind of zoning anymore. But I did find a couple, but it didn't work out. And then some other properties that were wetlands. But trying to do zoning, I was looking anywhere in the Richmond metro area, which you know is 13 counties and 4 cities. And trying to deal with the different zoning and how we would go about doing this was very difficult. But thank goodness there was one property we found that some city officials were involved in. It was a problem with accessing the property, and got connected with Stephen Harms with the city of Richmond, and he really liked the idea of our project. And actually, I had looked at buying some city property, and the ones I checked into didn't work. But then he found a piece of property next to a landfill. It used to be a heliport for the city of Richmond 20-some years ago, and the landfill next to it is closed. So I went and looked at it. This is what it looks like. It's kind of a mess, but it's doable, and I like taking something that's a mess and making it look good. So it went to city council. This is 3 acres, but next to it is is part of the landfill. We were going to get a little bit of that too. to make it close to 5 acres to be able to build our Eden Village. And currently there are people sleeping there and a lot of bad things going on according to the residents that live next door. So it went to City Council to sell it to us for $100, and it passed unanimously. And we are so excited. I'm so proud to be a part of Richmond City because they are supporting this project so much, and it's very appreciated. This is the Eden Village of Wilmington, what we plan to make ours look like. They're called tiny homes. I think the state definition for a tiny home is 400 feet. So the visionary that put this together made them 405 square feet so that they weren't considered tiny homes, because a lot of communities don't accept tiny homes. But there'll be 1 bedroom, 1 bath. It will be a gated community with fingerprint entry. They'll be fully furnished. It will have a community center with offices for social services and counseling, community store, a kitchen and dining area, and a laundromat. And it will have a good garden and gazebo. This is what the houses look like. We feel like front porches were an important part of this. We're trying to create a community feel because many people, especially lower income people, have lived in apartments all their life. And there's a lot of mental illness that is involved, and a single home is better for somebody like that to heal. Most of the homeless the people have to be homeless for over a year and have chronic illnesses. They get preference for our residents. This is another one, has a handicap ramp built. We will probably partner with Project Homes, or we'll get lots of volunteers. I've already got a list of 50 volunteers of people that want to help build the ramps. This is a bedroom, which is a huge deal to somebody that's been sleeping on the streets for 5 years. We've had some of the people in Wilmington and the other Eden villages had a hard time adjusting to living in a home, and they would sleep on the front porch for the first week, come into the house, sleep on the floor, but open the windows and finally be able to sleep in a bed. So the bedroom's a huge deal. The bathroom's a big deal. I mean, when you live in the woods, just finding a place to shower or go to the bathroom is a very big deal. There's the kitchen. They're very cute designed homes. These will be modular homes built off-site. The foundation will not have to be real big, and we will have them brought in. They come with refrigerator, stove, and microwave, and the heating and air conditioning unit. And Wilmington used it's called Virginia Building Solutions, use the company that we will use. And then Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is building Eden Village also. So that company builds them for all of us at a lower cost because we're giving them so much business. It will have a garden. This is Wilmington's, and the guy that did this garden was a homeless man that lived kind of close to the property, but he came for the first 2 years and got the garden going before the village itself was started. It will also have chickens. We might be able to sell those and make a lot of money, sell the eggs, but I don't know if they'll let us have a rooster because they crow so bad, but we plan to have a chicken coop with chickens. A lot of the homeless pass and have lost contact with their families. So when they pass, their ashes usually sit in city offices with nobody claiming them. So we will have a memory garden to put their ashes in when they pass. The community center is a big deal. This is Wilmington's community center. since we have a kitchen and dining hall, a lot of organizations will come and cook dinners and do things with our residents. And like I said, we'll have offices for social services and counseling. The people are also assigned a team of 3 to 4 people that will be like we call them a home team, to be a friend for them if they're having a panic attack, need to go to a doctor or something like that, that they can reach out to. The whole vision has just been real well thought out. The guy that designed it, we call him the visionary, worked at a Community First in Austin, Texas, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. There are 20 acres with tents, sheds, RVs, and that kind of thing. But most cities or counties aren't going to accept that. I actually think one organization tried to do that in Caroline County, and it was turned down. But anyway, so he brought it down to smaller size and just thought everything through so well. And that's why this has been so successful. This is the side of the community center where people congregate. This is Tulsa, Oklahoma's community center. This is Springfield, Missouri's homes. They did theirs in a more colorful way. These are some of the residents. We have picnic tables and gazebos. Green space is a big, important thing for us with this, too. This is what from Wilmington, from the upper view, looks like. We'll have solar panels. They will only pay $350 a month for rent, which includes utilities. So the solar panels are really important to help keep the electricity down and everything. Our mission statement is that to build relationships and life-changing, affordable individual housing communities for the homeless in partnership with other organizations, donors, volunteers in the Richmond area. So, like I said, community is a huge part of this. And a saying we have is housing is healthcare. If you lived out in the streets for 5 years trying to find food each day, in extreme heat or extreme cold, the lifespan of a homeless person is usually 10 to 20 years less than the average person. Wilmington just opened 2 years ago, and they've already lost three of their residents have passed. Ending homeless is possible when all of us come together with compassion, strategy, and commitment. And with the city's support, we're turning an empty lot into a place of dignity and healing. Our environment is kind of restrictive. So, like I said, it's gated community with fingerprint entry. They can have 4 visitors, overnight visitors a month that have to be registered. We're trying to keep the bad guys out. And we will have a drug sniffing dog on site. And because of our restrictions and the rent, we don't accept HUD money because it is very restrictive and it doesn't fit our plans. So we had to reach out other ways to raise funds. This is the layout of the property and what it green space is very important to us. This has 36 houses, and you can see the community center there. We did find that there is a sewer easement through here, but it's very deep and a very big sewer easement that is encased in cement, so we might not have to redo our design, but we're in the process of figuring that out. Since we only charge $350 a month rent, it doesn't quite pay all of our bills. So an idea I came up with, and it's been backed up by a lot of what the other people have been saying, we want to build, this will be outside of the community at the top of the page, some mid-income homes, but we would rent them at a below market rate. Like $500 to $1,000 below market rate to make we'll make a little bit of money for that to help pay for our Eden Village. And once this was on the news, I got so many calls, between the homeless and those. I have had so many calls of people desperately wanting lower income housing. Just want to talk quickly about the causes of homelessness. The first thing people think about when they think of homelessness is addiction, but affordable housing is, I've talked to so many people that are losing homes, living in their cars, living with family because they cannot afford housing. Somebody might lose a job, poverty, chronic illness or disability, they can't work anymore, and that is not enough to pay their bills when they get disability. Mental illness, a lot of people treat mental illness, or the homeless especially, with drugs rather than trying to get help. Unstable family situations. I have witnessed kids and people being raised in horrible situations. And when those kids grow up, they can't function in society like our kids can. There's spousal abuse and there is addiction. A picture I like to show is this iceberg. What we see is the addiction, but underneath the causes are childhood trauma, mental health challenges, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, poverty, loneliness, grief, loss, and pain. I personally have, my father, his father was a severe alcoholic, and then his mom died in childbirth when he was like 7 or 8. But because of that, the father went on Skid Row for 15 years. And then my father and his sister had to go to an orphanage and were eventually adopted by an aunt. But there's lots of, that's just one of many situations that happen. This is United Way's a survey on how providing housing for homelessness affects the community. Ambulance rides. This shows after the homes were built or people were housed, how much the ambulance calls were reduced by, at the ends, 47%. Gosh, I don't have my glasses on to see what that next one is. But anyway, between hospital bill, actually the people that started the one in Wilmington, he was an anesthesiologist and was treating people and then putting them back out on the streets. And that's what caused him to want to do it, but it reduces hospitalizations, it reduces police calls for trespassing and, altercations and stuff like that. So the other Eden villages have increased the property values around them once they have been built, and they've decreased police intervention. These are all the cities that have started in Eden Village. The first 3 or 4 there have already started. Some, like us, have just got the property or getting going, and then several are still raising funds and looking for land. Okay, the big question is who pays for all this? There is a big grant called a Federal Home Loan Grant, which we just missed getting this year that the other Eden villages have gotten. It's like $1 million. This year it was $1.2 million. So next year, in the spring, we'll be eligible for that. There's an Affordable House Trust Fund, which is $1 million, but the project needs to be completed within 9 months after you get the grant, so we're not eligible for that yet. There's several bank grants. We've applied for the Bank of America and Fulton Bank. We're waiting to hear for that, and I feel pretty confident that we'll get those. One's $100,000, one's $50,000. And then foundation grants, local foundation grants. We do a lot of fundraising. I'll show you that here in a few minutes. Another big thing is we ask people to sponsor homes. The homes cost us $66,000, but we sponsor them at $45,000. And then the church family organization that sponsored it gets to name it. Like if we did it for our in-laws, we would call it Mom Poppy's Place, and then there's a sign put on the house according to whatever name that person wants to name it. And again, and then the community centers are sponsored by banks or big companies. Wilmington was able to open debt-free because all their houses and the community centers were sponsored.
Kathy, could you kind of wrap up, and we can always have you back to.
Okay, let me get through it. Okay, I can just go through that. The advantage of the Eden Village model is that it's established. It's not something that's just, I'm starting, it's already established. Other ways we raise funds, we'll have a tree of life in the community center according to people's donations will be showed on the leaves. A lot of volunteers will be used for many things. And I think, and then I made a puzzle out of the Alone We Can Do So Little thing and made 35-piece puzzle and asking people to do recurring donations. Again, the house sponsorships. And we do house parties informing people about Eden Village. We have a documentary we show, and it's also been highlighted on the Kelly Clarkson show, and we will show that at the house parties. This is the budget we put together to get the development budget. So that first line is what we hope to get done by the end of this year, and then as funds come in, we will finish, and then the last stage will be making those other affordable housing. And I think that's it.
So what's the total cost to complete the project?
5.9 million. We hope to get that done in 3-4 years.
And how much have you been able to raise so far?
Right now, we're at 118,000, but we've already spent 11,000 for the environmental study. We have a prominent local architect that's going to do our site plan for us, and that's worth 35,000. What else?
For free.
Oh, yeah, he's doing it pro bono. But like I said, if we can get to that, if we can count that, we need to raise 200,000 more this year, and then we'll be eligible for all these big grants and stuff in the spring of next year.
Okay. Are there questions? It sounds like a great project. I have one other question. When Camp Kathy was demolished, what happened to the folks who were there?
They were devastated because when you've been homeless, you don't have an identity, you don't have an address, so you don't have your identity. And some of them got their identity while they were there, and it was in the tents. And they were devastated and just heartbroken. And that's why I was so passionate about doing something about this. And like I said, thank God we have people that feed them and clothe them and everything, but it's like, to me, it's like a wound that never heals. It's not solving the problem.
All right. Thank you so much for bringing this to us, and we'll bring you back for an update.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We now move to agenda item number 4 on the reprivatization of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac with Bill West.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me, and appreciate your shared passion for housing. It's important. It's an economic driver. And I will tell you that while it impacts all of us, this is really a national issue. It's going to be decided inside the Beltway. So I have pirated a lot of my slides from Pete Mills and the legislative staff at the MBA inside DC. They can lobby far more articulately than I can, so I'll give a lot of credit to them. So thank you for your time. I will also say that we are guilty in our industry of speaking in acronym and maybe some buzzwords that you're not familiar with. So and I will tell you that the capital markets gets a little more esoteric still. So if I get off on a rant and somebody doesn't understand what I'm saying, raise your hand, slow me down, happy to accommodate. So I will start by saying that we have a little bit of optimism in room for bringing borrowing costs down. Is it on? Can you hear me? Just need to stand a little closer. Gotcha. So there's a little bit of optimism for believing that we can bring borrowing costs down for America going forward. We have an opportunity to get something right. So I'll give you that little spoiler alert. We got some good news coming. But first, I'll start by trying to define what Fannie and Freddie are. And they are often referred to as GSEs, government-sponsored entities. Why is that important? What do? They bundle and securitize mortgages. The primary goal of that is providing liquidity. Liquidity is the key to these organizations. Right now, the mortgage-backed security is the second most liquid. Still can't hear me? Sorry, it's reverberating here. It's really loud. Thank you for that. So mortgage-backed securities are the second largest liquid market in the United States, and that is in critical importance that we maintain that. If we don't, borrowing costs go up, not down. So it's really important that we get this right. Mortgage-backed securities offer credit quality, and so they pay a premium above the United States Treasury bills. So it allows an investor to diversify their risk and get greater income potential. And the big piece is that guarantee on the security, something called a G fee or a guarantee fee that we're going to talk about that is critically important to providing that liquidity and maintaining it. So without getting back into the Big Short and the mortgage market meltdown, that would be a wholly different presentation. We're going to talk real quickly about how we got here and some important dates. Important to note that this is the reprivatization of GSEs. It is not a privatization. Fannie's actually been around for a really, really long time. 1938, they split off from their cousin Ginnie Mae. In 1968, Ginnie Mae becomes important later, so hold on to that. Ginnie Mae is the government National Mortgage Association that's responsible for the securitization of FHA and VA loans, loans with direct government backing. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac comes along in 1997. And they are really galvanized and privatized in 89. And the GSA Act of 1992 brings them into what we know today. They go in obviously into receivership after the mortgage market meltdown in 2008. Everybody remember the 1990s and Fannie and Freddie and what's happening? I tried to grab a couple of headlines and paywalls prevented it, but the headlines were not good. You had these privately traded companies reaping huge benefits and huge profits and paying out huge bonuses to their executives, all predicated upon the implicit guarantee of the United States government. Implicit, hold on to that word, we'll come back to it later. So 1990s, they garnered a lot of attention and none of it good. And then, in the irony of all ironies, in that category of no good deed goes unpunished, William Jefferson Clinton famously chides or pushes Fannie and Freddie in 1997 to expand home ownership for all Americans. Very altruistic, well-received, good message. And unfortunately, it took on a momentum and a weight of its own and collided with a lot of other things that led us to the mortgage market meltdown. A lot of bad actors, a lot of blame to go around. If anybody wants a good read on it, highly recommend Michael Lewis's The Big Short, same author who wrote Liar's Poker and Blindside. So great read if you haven't picked it up. I understand the movie did a pretty good job. So we go into conservatorship. And to be clear, this has been a really, really good investment for the United States Treasury Department and the taxpayers. They've done exceedingly well. But take a quick look at the chart that we've got here starting in 2009. The average G fee or guarantee fee, the insurance on that security that made it liquid and made it attractive, was about 21 to 22 basis points. Enter in the government in 2010, they add 10 basis points to pay for a payroll tax. Thereafter, there's another 10 basis points that's added to pay for the Navy Veterans Vietnam Blue Water Act and a couple of non-germane taxes, and all of a sudden we're up around 61 to 63 basis points. Why is that important? Well, there's a difference between a coupon rate that an investor gets when they're buying a security and the note rate that you and I as a consumer pay when we're borrowing a mortgage. That spread was always about 0.5%. when the G fees were right around 25 basis points. So if you got a 5.5% coupon, it's roughly a 6% mortgage. 25% went to the government to issue that security, that guarantee. They say, hey, if you've underwritten and closed a loan to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac standards, We will put our stamp of guarantee on it. We are going to guarantee the principal and interest to that bondholder. And that's where the liquidity comes into play. It is guaranteed with an implicit guarantee at the time from the United States government. Today, that guarantee fee is up over 60 basis points. So that same 5.5 coupon is no longer a 6% interest rate. It's about 6 3/8. So things have gone up. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac get placed into conservatorship with an original capital pledge of $441 billion. The Treasury actually injected $190 billion of that available pledge, and to date has received over $300 billion back in dividends. They control Fannie and Freddie through something called PSPAs, which is a private stock purchase agreement. So you may hear me use PSPAs, so I'll try and define that. So when might Fannie and Freddie come out of receivership? No time soon. Despite all the tweets, this is a complex issue, and it's going to take some time. They did change the nature of the PSPAs in 2020. They are no longer sweeping capital out of Fannie and Freddie. Fannie and Freddie have been allowed to retain some capital. They are woefully short. Right now, Tier 1 capital reserves would be required to be about $340 billion. They're about $147 billion at last take, which leaves them about $181 billion shy at a run rate of about $25 billion combined profit a year. That's a little over 7 years before they could go private again. There's another headwind. Those PSPAs that took up 80% of the stock that used to have a 10% dividend yield have now been allowed to grow in value. So that $190,000 original stock investment is no longer sweeping all the capital out of Fannie and Freddie, but it's growing in value. It's now up to $340 billion. So again, the taxpayer and the Treasury have done exceedingly well with this investment. And if you look at the spread between mortgage rates being the higher line, the blue line, and the 10-year maturity, it's always kind of moved in lockstep. And if you're really, really keen on this one, you'll see it's about a 200 basis point spread until we get to 2010. And if you can spy it, what happens to the gap? Gets a little wider. Here's a chart that is charting the spread between the 10-year and mortgage-backed securities. COVID takes a little bit of a dip, but spoiler alert, when you've got government involved in regulating the securities industry, something that they're really not geared to do, it got more expensive. We saw the G fees that went up from about 20 basis points to 60, so there's about a 0.5% interest rate right there, about 40 basis points. But right now we're living at about 300 basis points. Interest rates and borrowing costs to the consumers are about a full percentage point higher than they would be naturally if the government didn't have to take the drastic steps to take Fannie and Freddie into receivership. The other gem that they left us with in 2008, LLPAs, loan level price adjusters. Everybody remember hearing about these in the news 2 years ago? So the increased G fees and loan level price adjusters, which are price hits for every bucket of credit score and every different property type, are probably sticky. I am not winding up to tell you that we should take them all the way back to private and have an implicit guarantee again. There were problems there. Again, Fannie and Freddie were criticized justly for making huge profits off of an implied government guarantee. Shouldn't be our job as the taxpayers to backstop them and allow them to reap all the benefits. But I think that these can be softened. If you look particularly at things like investment properties and second homes, those price hits were egregious to the point where they really stopped to exist. For about 2 years, we couldn't lend on investor properties. They did not pass the government's own points and fees test. So clearly we have room to get better here. So what's the path forward? Again, how long does it take? It's going to take about 7 years if we allow Fannie and Freddie to recapitalize and meet Tier 1 capital needs organically. It's probably 10 when you add the ever-growing debt that is on those PSPAs because they're growing in value. I don't think we can wait that long. The consumer's been overburdened with a higher borrowing cost than they need. So my best guess is that in the next year or two, you're going to see a plan to have a plan. It'll probably be a 3 to a 4 year ramp. That is going to require a lot of negotiation inside DC. How do we repay the Treasury, the initial $190 billion? Is it just 190 billion? They take their profit and they walk away? Probably not. Is it the inflated 340 billion? That's not quite fair because they were sweeping the capital. It'll be something in between. And so there's going to be a lot of wrangling and politicking in the background. And this is where I'm going to rely on the NBA and DC. They've got a vision for a really good plan going forward, and I'm going to hope that we can all support them. The big trick to getting this right is to get FHFA, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, that currently governs Fannie and Freddie, a duopoly, if you will, to go from a conservatorship to a regulator. They need to regulate the profits, probably similar to a utility. Dominion Power, for example, publicly traded, but they're regulated because they serve the public. So too does Fannie and Freddie serve the public. And this is really, really important because what we're talking about is the American dream. The reason that Fannie and Freddie are so intertwined with the government is the American dream is unique. We are the only country that has a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. No other country, not Canada, not the UK, not the European Union. If anybody goes and fact checks me real quick, you'll find that there is one country, France, that occasionally dabbles with a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, but it's very seldom used. So the American dream is unique to us. This is how we allow people to build equity and generate wealth. So it's important that the government plays a role and gets this right. Ultimately, success will be to end the profit sweeps from Fannie and Freddie, and again, turn FHA more into a regulator than a conservator, sorry. So we've got the opportunity to get it right, and this is where I really hope that MBA and some others can be very good advocates and educate, which is kind of a dry, boring topic, and get it across to the right people. The biggest thing that we want to do is make sure that we have a good backstop. We don't think the taxpayers should be backstopping Fannie and Freddie. If those are going to be privately traded again, great, let them stand on their own. What needs to be sacrosanct, and again, retain that liquidity and that capital, is to make the mortgage-backed security bulletproof. One great idea would be to take some of that excessive G fee and pare it down and have Fannie and Freddie buy pool insurance or an additional guarantee on their security through Ginnie Mae. Take 10, take 15 basis points and ensure that security, making sure that the taxpayer is only on the hook at the very last line of defense and only to that mortgage-backed security and not to the entity. So I think that's a really neat solution and could bring borrow costs down. So there are a couple of different potential structures here. We want to remove the implicit guarantee. Implicit is not what the market has enjoyed for the last several years. They've been in receivership. They have direct government backing right now. If you unwind and take that away, it would be at the peril of interest rates. They would go higher. We don't want to reduce investor demand. JP Morgan Chase actually had a really good article out earlier this year. And if you look at only current capital and Fannie and Freddie are out of receivership, you would expect basis points to go up about 40 basis points, almost 0.5% in interest rate. If we allowed them to be fully capitalized and out of receivership, a little bit better, not as bad. If they had the PSPA support and current capital versus more capital and PSPA support, then they're neutral. But look at the far right. If we can get to an explicit guarantee, not an implied guarantee, where that mortgage-backed security has Fannie and Freddie's guarantee, but also has some credit risk transfer and maybe a security through Ginnie and extra pool insurance, such that you and I, the taxpayer, are not on the hook, you could actually attract more capital and see borrowing costs go down. If you soften some of those LLPAs, soften the G fees, again, I think they're sticky. I don't think they go away. Taxes and revenue sources have a hard time getting stricken. They tend to stick around. But I think you can soften them and attract more capital and have a more liquid, safer environment. So a couple of definitions for success. Again, replacing the PSPAs. The Treasury Department's had their run. They've made a lot of money there at the expense of the taxpayers and some of it non-germane. So I'll stay off of that soapbox. But the taxpayers need to be protected. PSPA, private stock purchase agreement. That's how the Treasury Department controls Fannie and Freddie. My apologies. Thank you for that. One of the other big things is if they would switch to more of a from a conservatorship to a regulatory role, we want to make sure that we have a level playing field and access to capital. One of the problems that plagued Fannie and Freddie going into the mortgage market meltdown is they had favorites. A Countrywide or a WAMU that had securitized a boatload of deals with them would get preferential treatment at, say, 19 or 20 basis points, where the rest of us who are maybe doing 3 or 4 billion a year were paying 22 or 23 basis points. And that kind of flies in the face of fair lending and what they're trying to achieve. It should be a very even level playing field. So that's a pretty dry topic, and hopefully in pretty quick time, because I know I'm between you and lunch. What kinds of questions do you have for me?
Okay, thank you so very much for that very informative presentation. I believe we have no questions. I mean, you all are satisfied with all that information?
Holy cow.
Wow.
All right, well, thank you.
You must have done an excellent job.
Well, I didn't put anybody to sleep, so thanks.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate that.
Can I tell you one thing I forgot to say?
Very quickly.
We also have 2 houses committed for sponsorship, so that's 90,000 we'll have in the next couple weeks. And another nonprofit that is going, that's inactive, is giving us their 9,000. So we're up to like 250.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you to all of our presenters today for this Housing Commission meeting. We appreciate all of the information that you've provided us with today, and we are more informed because of it. We're now down to agenda item number 5, public comment. Any of you out there just dying to jump up and say something? What? No?
On the 19th of August, there are 2 work group meetings.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so on the 19th, we will have 2 work group meetings. The Affordable Housing Solutions Landlord, Tenant, and Real Estate Law Work Group, and if you can say that 5 times, you are more than welcome to attend at 10 a.m. On the 19th, and at 1 p.m., the Neighborhood Transitions Local Land Use and Community Living Work Group will be meeting on that same day. The next full commission meeting will be on October 7th at 10 a.m. So we look forward to seeing you all there. And if there's no further business to come before the Housing Commission, we will be adjourned.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.